Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with Part 2, Stanza 4, Creation of the First Races. 14. The seven hosts, the will, or mind, mon, lords, propelled by the spirit of the life-giving, Fohat, separate men from themselves, each on his own zone. A. They threw off their shadows, or astral bodies, if such an ethereal being as a lunar spirit may be supposed to rejoice in an astral, besides a hardly tangible body. In another commentary, it is said that the ancestors breathed out the first man, as Brahma is explained to have breathed out the suras, gods, when they became asuras, from asu, breath. In a third, it is said that they, the newly created men, were shadows of the shadows. Now, this breath is logos, right? It is movement enacted. There, until the breath happened, there was stasis, and then once the breath happened, there was creation. And so, created from breath does not necessarily mean that there was this being that came to the planet and breathed and created, right? It is God said, start, that's a breath, and everything started. The Big Bang could be God going, bang, right? It is really that simple to me. I don't have that overwhelming drive to understand exactly where that 0 point came from. It's not that important. Other people can fight that fight. I'm not here for that. I believe that we were created willfully, that we are all here intentionally, with purpose, and not as a punishment. And so, you are the direct result of the will of God. But that will is nothing unless it is acted upon, and so God acted upon it and breathed, and there was life. With regard to this sentence, they were the shadows of the shadows, a few more words may be said and a fuller explanation attempted. The first process of the evolution of mankind is far easier to accept than the one which follows it, though one and all will be rejected and doubted even by some Kabbalists, especially the Western, who study the present effects, but have neglected to study their primary causes. Nor does the writer feel competent to explain a mode of procreation so difficult of appreciation, save for an Eastern occultist. Therefore, it is useless to enter here into details concerning the process, though it is minutely described in the secret books, as it would only lead to speaking of facts hitherto unknown to the profane world, and hence to their being misunderstood. Now, I have a problem here in that this secret books, right? I want to know what these are. My understanding was that those things were going to be in this, the secret doctrine, right? But it's not so far, right? We have had another explanation of the exact same things that we talked about in Isis Unveiled, which is one of in the playlist up here. But the reference to these secret books we've had a couple of times, but no naming what they are, nor where they can be located, or what they contain, right? It is minutely described in the secret books, but it would only lead to speaking of facts unknown. So why would we expose facts that are unknown? Are you kidding me? That is what you are literally doing here, is exposing facts unknown. And so why not include that in here? Okay. Like that's a problem for me. Oh, I've got this source material, but you can't see it. There's some golden tablets that I dug out of the ground, and I translated them myself, and these words are exactly in accordance with the divine will of God, and if you deviate from them, then you are condemned to hell. that is equally stupid to me, right? If you don't have your source material listed, then don't tell me that there's a source material. Don't tell me that it's just a secret book you can't even know the name of. That defeats the entire purpose of what we are doing here, right? The entire purpose of this book is to expose things, and you are not exposing them, you are hiding them. And that's annoying. Like, seriously annoying. And Adam, made of the dust of the ground, will always be found preferable by a certain class of students to one projected out of the ethereal body of his creator. Though the former process has never been heard of, while the latter is familiar, as all know, to many spiritualists in Europe and America, who, of all men, ought to understand it. For who of those who have witnessed the phenomena of a materializing form oozing out of the pores of a medium, or, at other times, out of his left side, can fail to credit the possibility, at least, of such a birth? Now, this can be a thing. I have no evidence whatsoever to believe that it is. One of the things that we discussed in great detail as we were going through Isis Unveiled, right? The first part of it was dealing extensively with these spiritual things. You can read into anything, that which you want to find into anything. So if you're sitting down to have an occult gathering, then there's probably going to be something occult that happens from it, whether there is actually something that occult that happens from it or not. Ouija boards are a good example of that, and that is not to discount the fact that there can be actual use to a Ouija board, but most of the time it is not useful in any way, shape, or form whatsoever, except opening doors that could probably be left closed. I don't have the reference points for a first-hand account by a couple of witnesses, right? It is, if me and my homeboy are sitting here and we concoct this story about this thing coming out of my side, we can record that, and who can dispute it? It's just the two of us. But if there's a whole group of people and they all record the same thing, that's a little bit harder to dismiss. But we don't have that, right? We have several accounts of these things being discounted. We have a few accounts of a singular, me and my homeboy in a room, but not really accounts of groups witnessing something come out of the left side of a human being, right? I'm interested in that kind of thing. If you know of an account where it is at least a little bit on the non-suspicious side, drop it in the box down below. I will absolutely check that out because I am interested in those things. I have an open mind that they might be possible, but I have zero reason to believe them, right? There is zero reason to believe at all that somebody oozed out of the body of somebody else and became a creature. Like, I don't have any reason to believe that at all. None. There is zero corroborating evidence that this is a thing that happens on a regular basis, right? And so, if it is, if you have some kind of documentation that would prove that this possibility at least was a thing, then let me know. But I do not believe it, right? I don't, like, I hold in my mind that I can be wrong about things. I do. And this is one of those things. I can be wrong, but I have no reason to believe that I might be. If there are, in the universe, such beings as angels or spirits, whose incorporeal essence may constitute an intelligent entity, notwithstanding the absence of any, to us, solid organism, and if there are those who believe that a God made the first man out of dust and breathed into him a living soul, and there are millions upon millions who believe both, what does this doctrine of ours contain that is so impossible? I don't believe either one of those, right? I don't believe that our creation had to be from angels or from an incarnated God. I don't believe that at all. I believe that we are here at the express will of God. The same God who said, let there be an earth, and it was. The same God who said, let that earth revolve around the sun, and it did. It does not have to have some entity in charge of that in a corporeal state. That is anthropomorphous. You are assigning to something attributes which are human-like and do not necessarily belong there. So both of those, to me, are possible, but neither one of those are necessary. Either one of them. And if that's confusing to you, fall back to the Bible study, please. Back to the text. Very soon the day will dawn when the world will have to choose whether it will accept the miraculous creation of man, and cosmos too, out of nothing, according to the dead letter of Genesis, or a man born from a fantastic link, absolutely missing so far, the common ancestor of man and of the true ape. Footnote. Huxley, supported by the most evident discoveries in comparative anatomy, could utter the momentous sentence that the anatomical differences between man and the highest apes are less than those between the latter and the lowest apes. In relation to our genealogical tree of man, the necessary conclusion follows that the human race has evolved gradually from the true apes, the pedigree of man. I disagree with that, right? I do not believe that it was a natural evolution. That does not mean that there had to be an entity come down here. We have explained several times, and we'll hit it again real quick. I believe in the 12,000 year disaster cycle, and that 12,000 year disaster cycle contains things that can explain this. It is entirely possible that there was an electromagnetic disruption from the sun which affected through solar radiation the creatures which inhabited the earth, causing spontaneous mutations within the species which allowed them to become a different species. It is much less likely that it was due to natural selection. There is no biological imperative for losing hair to replace them with clothing. There's just not. There is no reason why that would be a thing that had to happen. There is no reason why a female in selection would choose something that was so aberrant to the species, unless there was not a whole lot of choice about the matter, that this spontaneous mutation affected many different creatures across the earth, creating new species from them. Evolution within the species is absolutely a thing. Microevolution. Evolution between the species takes extraordinary effort and, therefore, requires extraordinary proof, and we do not have a single link between apes and humans. We don't. We have what we want to be links, and so we force that link between them, but that is not necessarily a true thing. Even Lucy, the oldest progenitor to the humans, is not really human. Between these two fallacies, footnote 2. Oh wait, we didn't get to the end of that first footnote. The first footnote, in what may be scientific and logical objection to the opposite conclusion, we would ask, the anatomical resemblances between man and the anthropoids, grossly exaggerated as they are by the Darwinist, as Monsieur de Quatrefages shows, are simply enough accounted for when the origin of the latter is taken into consideration. Nowhere in the older deposits is an ape to be found that approximates more closely to man, or a man that approximates more closely to ape. And now we're on footnote 2. The same gulf which is found today between man and ape goes back with undiminished breadth and depth to the tertiary period. This fact alone is enough to make its untenability clear. Between these two fallacies, occult philosophy steps in. It teaches that the first human stock was projected by higher and semi-divine beings out of their own essences. If the latter process is to be considered as abnormal or even inconceivable, because obsolete in nature at this point of evolution, it is yet proven possible on the authority of certain spiritualistic facts. Which, then, we ask of the three hypotheses or theories is the most reasonable and the least absurd. Certainly, no one, provided he is not a blind materialist, can ever object to the occult teachings. I object. I object. Loudly, vehemently, and with great vigor, for reasons that have been explained several times through this, and not the least of which was just now. I object. I have a plausible objection. I have something that can be what actually happened, and explain some things that we do not have explanations for. And so, therefore, me, who is not a soul-blind materialist, can, indeed, object to this occult teaching. Now, As shown, we gather from the latter that man was not created the complete being he is now. However imperfect he still remains. There was a spiritual, a psychic, an intellectual, and an animal evolution, from the highest to the lowest, as well as physical development, from the simple and homogeneous up to the more complex and heterogeneous, though not quite on the lines traced for us by the modern evolutionists. This double evolution is two contrary directions, required various ages of diverse natures and degrees of spirituality and intellectuality to fabricate the being now known as man. Furthermore, the one absolute, ever-acting and never-erring law, which proceeds on the same lines from one eternity, or manvantara, to the other, ever furnishing an ascending scale for the manifested, or that which we call the great illusion, Mahamaya. I do not believe we are in an illusion. We have talked about that several times. But plunging spirit deeper and deeper into materiality on the one hand, and then redeeming it through flesh and liberating it. This law, we say, uses for these purposes the beings from other and higher planes, men or minds, manus, in accordance with their karmic exigencies. At this juncture, the reader is again asked to turn to the Indian philosophy and religion. The esotericism of both is at one with our secret doctrine, however much the form may differ and vary. On the identity and differences of the incarnating powers. The progenitors of man, called in India fathers, Pitata or Pitris, are the creators of our bodies and lower principles. They are ourselves as the first personalities, and we are they. Primeval man would be the bone of their bone and the flesh of their flesh, if they had body and flesh. As stated, they were lunar beings. This is again something that I just disagree with vehemently for reasons that have been expounded upon, and this is already going to be a long one, so I'm not going to do it again. If you are interested in my arguments, fall back to the rest of this study where we have done it several times. The endowers of man with his conscious immortal ego are the solar angels, whether so regarded metaphorically or literally. The mysteries of the conscious ego or human soul are great. The esoteric name of these solar angels is literally the Lord's Nath of persevering, ceaseless devotion, pranidhana. Therefore, they of the fifth principle, manas, seem to be connected with or to have originated the system of the yogis, who make of pranidhana their fifth observance. We are in the fifth plane of existence, so that I actually accord with them on. It has already been explained why the trans-Himalayan occultists regard them as evidently identical with those who in India are termed Kumaras, Agnishwatas, and the Barhishats. See yesterday's video for more explanation on that. How precise and true is Plato's expression? How profound and philosophical his remark on the human soul, or ego, when he defined it as a compound of the same and the other, and yet how little this hint has been understood since the world took it to mean that the soul was the breath of God, of Jehovah. It is the same and the other, as the great initiate philosopher said, for the ego, the higher self, when merged with and in the divine monad, is man, and yet the same as the other, the angel in him incarnated, as the same with that universal Mahat. The great classics and philosophers felt this truth when saying that there must be something within us which produces our thoughts, something very subtle. It is a breath, it is fire, it is ether. These are all plasma. It is quintessence. It is a slender likeness. It is an intellection. It is a number. It is harmony. And none of that is intellection maybe, but the rest of this is not the soul, right? The breath, the fire, the ether, the quintessence, the number, all of that, the harmony, all of that is the spirit and not the soul. All these are the Manasam and Rajasas, the Kumaras, Asuras, and the other rulers and Pitras who incarnated in the third race, and in this and various other ways, endowed mankind with mind. There are 7 classes of Pitras, as shown below, 3 incorporeal and 4 corporeal, and 2 kinds, the Agnishwata and Barhishad. And we may add that, as there are 2 kinds of Pitras, so there is a double and triple set of Barhishad and Agnishwata. The former, having given birth to their astral doubles, are reborn as sons of Atri, and are the Pitras of the demons, or corporeal beings, on the authority of Manu, while the Agnishwata are reborn as sons of Marichi, a son of Brahma, and are the Pitras of the gods. Manu, again, Matsaya and Padma Puranas, and Kuluka in the laws of the Manavas. 3. Footnote. Let's go ahead and pop that out. We are quite aware that the Yayu and Matsaya Puranas identify, agreeably to Western interpretation, the Agnishwata with the seasons, and the Barhishad Pitras with the months, adding a 4th class, the Kavyas, cyclic years. But do not Christian Roman Catholics identify their angels with planets, and are not the 7 Rishis become the Saptarishi, a constellation? They are deities presiding over all the cyclic divisions. Moreover, the Vayu Purana declares all these 7 orders to have originally been the first gods, the Varahas, whom Brahma, with the eye of yoga, beheld in the eternal spheres, and who are the gods of gods. And the Matsaya adds that the gods worshipped them, while the Harivansa distinguishes the Virajas as one class of the Pitras only, a statement corroborated in the secret teachings, which however identify the Virajas with the elder Agnishwatas. Footnote 2. The Vaya Purana shows the region called Viraja Loka inhabited by the Agnishwatas. Identify the Virajas with the elder Agnishwatas and the Rahasas, or Abhutarashasas, who are incorporeal without even astral phantom. Vishnu is said in most of the manuscripts to have incarnated in and through them. In the Raivata Manvantara, again, Hari, best of gods, was born of Sambhuti, as the divine Manasas, originating with the deities called Rahasas. Sambhuti was a daughter of Daksha and wife of Marichi, the father of the Agnishwata, who, along with the Rahasas, are ever associated with Manasas. As remarked by a far more able Sanskritist than Wilson, Mr. Fitzedward Hall, Manasa is no inappropriate name for a deity associated with the Rahasas. We appear to have it in Manasam, the same as Manas, with the change of termination required to express male personification. All the sons of Viraja are Manasa, says Nilakanta, and Viraja is Brahma, and therefore the incorporeal Pitras are called Virashas, from being the sons of Viraha, says Vayu Purana. We could multiply our proofs ad infinitum, but it is useless. The wise will understand our meaning. The unwise are not required to. There are 33 crores, or 330 millions, of gods in India. But, as remarked by the learned lecturer on the Bhagavad Gita, they may all be devas, but are by no means all gods in the high spiritual sense one attributes to the term. None of them are gods. Not a single one of them are a god. This is an unfortunate blunder, he remarks, generally committed by Europeans. Deva is a kind of spiritual being, and because the same word is used in ordinary parlance to mean God, it by no means follows that we have to worship 33 crores of gods. And he adds, suggestively, these beings, as may be naturally inferred, have a sudden affinity with one of the 3 component upadhis, basic principles, into which we have divided man, vide Theosophist. The names of the deities of a certain mystic class change with every manvantara. Thus, the 12 great gods, Yahas, created by Brahma to assist him in the work of creation in the very beginning of the Kalpa, and who, lost in Samadhi, neglected to create, whereupon they were cursed to be repeatedly born in each manvantara till the 7th, are respectively called Ajitas, Tushitas, Satyas, Haris, Vaikunthas, Sadhyas, and Adityas. They are Tushitas in the 2nd Kalpa, and Adityas in this Vayavsavata period. See Vayu Purana. Besides other names for each age. But they are identical with the Manasa or Rahasas, and these with our incarnating Dayan Kohans. They are all classes of the Ganadevas. Yes, besides those beings, who, like the Yakshas, Gandharvas, Kinnaras, etc., taken in their individualities, inhabit the astral plane, there are real Devagananams, and to these classes of devas belong the Adityas, the Varasyas, the Kumaras, the Asuras, and all those high celestial beings whom the occult teaching calls Manasman, the wise, foremost of all, and who would have made all men the self-conscious, spiritually intellectual beings they will be, had they not been cursed to fall into generation, and to be reborn themselves as mortals for their neglect of duty. I am going to point out really quickly that this is not a prison planet. You are not under punishment being here. Instead, you are here to learn lessons on behalf of the divine, right? You are here to experience things that the divine cannot. The divine, being eternal and the source for all things, cannot feel grief. There is no sense of loss when there is a death to the Creator. You return to the Creator immediately. There is no separation for Him. But for us, there is. You grieve when your loved one dies. And so, creation experiences grief through you. It experiences a different type of grief, or a different expression of that grief, through me. That is true for all of the emotions. That is true for all of the lessons. None of them are a punishment. They are all just simply a necessity along the path. When you can change your mind from I am being punished by being here to this is an experience that I get to have, it really changes the entirety of everything. It makes it worth living again. It really does. And so, to me, this is victim mentality. This is somebody is punishing me, and so I really don't have any control over my incarnation. And I do not believe that in the slightest bit. 15. 7 times 7 shadows, kakayas, of future men, or manasas, A, were thus born, each of his own color, complexion, and kind, B, each also inferior to his father, Creator. The fathers, the boneless, could give no life to beings with bones. Their progeny were Bhuta, phantoms, with neither form nor mind. Therefore they were called Kakaya, image or shadow, race. A. Manu, as already remarked, comes from the root man, to think, hence a thinker. It is from this Sanskrit word, very likely, that sprung the Latin mens, mind, the Egyptian menes, the mastermind, the Pythagorean monas, or conscious thinking unit, mind also, and even our manas, or mind, the 5th principle in man. Hence, these shadows are called amanasa, mindless. With the Brahmins, the Pitras are very sacred because they are the progenitors. Footnote. This was hinted at and Isis unveiled, though the full explanation could not then be given. The Pitras are not the ancestors of the present living men, but those of the first humankind or Adamic race. The spirits of human races, which, on the grand scale of descending evolution, preceded our races of men, and were physically as well as spiritually far superior to our modern pygmies. In Manava Dharma Sastra, they are called the lunar ancestors. And again, I don't believe in these, right? It is entirely possible that there is a creature alien to our understanding which were involved in us changing, right? The particular arrangement of our DNA was not necessarily accidental, right? It could have been fabricated. We could have been evolved from an animal. Not necessarily apes, right? If we were evolved from animals, there is a very good chance, right, in my evolutionary conspiracy with the electromagnetic radiation enacting the spontaneous mutations, that doesn't have to have been from one source animal, right? It could have been from bears and dogs and pigs and whatever, and that could be the reason why some of these animals are outlawed for certain groups, right? There are people that refuse to eat cows. There are people that refuse to eat pigs. There are people that refuse to eat dogs, right? There are people that eat all of those things. Some people are culturally restricted from it, and it may be because it is a source material. That is something that has to be considered. I don't necessarily believe it, but it is something that is possible. And once it has been enacted into a change where these things resemble each other enough that they can copulate, then there is intermingling and creation of these species. Now, I believe that it was probably from a singular source type, right? So it could be simians, it could be great apes, it could be lemurs. We don't know, because we do not have that missing link. But if there were simians here and simians there and simians over here, they would already be close enough that they could probably interbreed. They wouldn't select that way, but they probably could manage it. And if the mutation happened in this group and it created hairless people, and it happened in this group and it created a different group of hairless people, those people would probably be able to mate as well. There would be variations in tone. There would be variations in hair coverage. There would be variations in body structures. The capacity to get to a certain size could be limited from certain groups which came from a certain source material. And so you've got people that can't grow bigger than 5'2". It's my mom's side of the family. And you got people who are all 6 foot tall. That's my dad's side of the family. And so they can commingle. They are not the same source, but they can commingle in a meaningful way because they came from similar stock in the beginning with the mutation. That to me makes more sense than this one ape mutated, was selected for genetic continuation by what would have to be multiple females, and that's assuming that it was a male, right? Would have to be selected by multiple so that the progeny could propagate in such a way that it could commingle and continue the species. It is much more likely that there was a spontaneous mutative effect and the ones that were mutated commingled and created a continuing genetic line. That makes more sense to me than most of the theories of evolution which already exist. And so that is one of my unconventional beliefs. The Pitras are very sacred because they are the progenitors or ancestors of men, the first Manushya on this earth, and offerings are made to them by the Brahmin when a son is born unto him. They are more honored and their ritual is more important than the worship of the gods. It's only during when a son, though, right? It doesn't matter if you get a daughter, right? Who really even cares? They're just the life-giving element on the planet. They're not important at all. May we not now search for a philosophical meaning in this dual group of progenitors? The Pitras being divided into 7 classes. We have here the mystic number again. The number's actually 8. But even here, right, these 7 classes are the created beings, and the 8th one would be the one overarching that created them. So the 8 is there. Nearly all the Puranas agree that 3 of these are arupa, formless, while 4 are corporeal. The former being intellectual and spiritual, the latter material and devoid of intellect. Esoterically, it is the asuras who form the first 3 classes of Pitras, born in the body of night, whereas the other 4 were produced from the body of twilight. Their fathers, the gods, were doomed to be born fools on earth, according to Vayu Purana. The legends are purposely mixed up and made very hazy, the Pitras being in one the sons of the gods, and in another those of Brahma, while a third makes them instructors of their own fathers. It is the host of these 4 material classes who create men simultaneously on the 7 zones. Now, with regard to the 7 classes of Pitras, each of which is again divided into 7, a word to students and a query to the profane. That class of the Phayadayanis, which we identify on undeniable grounds with the Agnishwatas, is called in our school the heart of the Dayan Kohanic body, and it is said to have incarnated in the 3rd race of men and made them perfect. The esoteric mystagogy speaks of the mysterious relation existing between the hebdomadic essence or substance of this angelic heart and that of man, whose every physical organ and psychic and spiritual function is a reflection, so to say, a copy on the terrestrial plane of the model or prototype above. Why, it is asked, should there be such a strange repetition of the number 7 in the anatomical structure of man? Why should the heart have 4 lower cavities and 3 higher divisions? Well, looking back through science, we've got a better understanding of that, don't we? Answering so strangely to the septenary division of the human principles, separated into 2 groups, the higher and the lower. And why should the same division be found in the various classes of Pitras, and especially our fire Dahanis? For, as already stated, these beings fall into 4 corporeal, or grosser, and 3 incorporeal, or subtle, or principles, or call them by any name you please. Why do 7 nervous plexuses of the body radiate 7 rays? Why are these 7 plexuses? And why distinct layers in the human skin? 7 distinct layers in the human skin. Now, I haven't done the study on the skin, so I can't talk about that one, but I know about these 7 plexuses. We talk about them quite often. The Infinite Integrations playlist will take you through them, but I'm going to do it too. From the bottom to the top, they are the base, the sacral, the solar plexus, the heart, the throat, the third eye, the crown, and there's another one. It is outside of you. It is the divine chakra. These plexuses are the chakras. They are nerve centers. You can find them in yourself. And one of the easiest ones to find is the base. It's attached to your butthole, right? Not literally, but pretty close. The muscle complex, which pinches your sphincter, controls or is controlled by the base chakra. And you can flex that particular section by trying to pinch a turd, so to speak. Or you can flex it in a negative manner, right? There is a positive and a negative flex to every muscle. When I do my arm like this, that is a positive flex. When I do it like this, that is a negative flex of the same muscular structure. It is the same for all of the chakras. You can flex every single one of these plexuses from the bottom to the top in the exact same manner. Now, they alternate. One, the bottom one, it moves up and down. The next one moves forward and back. The next one moves up and down. The next one moves forward and back. as it goes up. These serve a function. The three lower ones, the base, the sacral, and the solar plexus, are linked. I guess that's the best way to put it. They govern the earthly material side of things. That is mere existence, that is sexual procreation, and that is nourishment for the main part. They have other functions as well, but that is the main functions of those three. They are the as below complex. Those three work together in concert for material things. The three on the top, the crown, the third eye, and the throat, they do the same thing on a spiritual level. That is the as above complex. The heart acts as a unifying force. The bottom, the lower complex, represents the body. The top, the upper complex, represents the soul, or the spirit. The heart represents your soul. That is where the choices are made, right, or enacted at least, and that is where the actual physical materialization of the manifestation happens. If you link your as above with your as below with common intention and pass the energy through that in ways that I explained in other places, you can direct that energy through the direction devices, which are your chakras, 2 of them anyway, into your heart. And from your heart, you can feed that into your divine. And that is where the actual manifestation happens. So I have an explanation for this. Why do we have 7 nervous plexuses? Because those hold you together. Each one of them holds together a different quality within you. The bottom is merely your chance to exist. Your sacral is your desire to procreate. The solar plexus is how you power your temple. Right? Each one of those contain those domains and work together for your betterment. The heart is the tying together of the physical and the spiritual. The throat is how you express yourself. The third eye is how you see forward. The crown is where you receive your divine instructions. All of these things serve a purpose. And so I fully agree that there are 7 plexuses which are in charge, and they are important. But there are 8 total plexuses. One of them is external from you. That can be a little bit hard to wrap your mind around because unlike your third eye, for example, there is nothing internal that it attaches itself to. It is instead fed from your heart. But it is separate from your heart. It is not the same. It is an interaction between the two. And so I have an answer for that. Now, these 7 rays, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? I have no understanding. I was hoping that we would get it elucidated upon in here, but really it just keeps mentioning the 7 rays without really explaining what they are. Now, that can be 7 different types of light. Okay, fine, if that's how you want to look at it, but they're all light. So to me, that's the same. It can be incandescent light like these light bulbs, and fire is a different kind of light, and lightning is a different kind of light. But all of those are the same to me. They are all the spirit. They are all movement happening. It is actually action taking place, and so it has to be the spirit. So to me, that is all the same thing. It is not necessarily different. Back to the text. Having projected their shadows and made men of one element, ether, the progenitors reascended to Mahaloka, where they descend periodically when the world is renewed to give birth to new men. The subtle bodies remain without understanding, manas, until the advent of the suras, gods, now called asuras, not gods, says the commentary. Not gods, for the Brahmins perhaps, but the highest breaths for the occultist, since these progenitors, Pitar, the formless and the intellectual, refuse to build man, but endow him with mind, the 4 corporeal classes creating only his body. This is very plainly shown in various texts in the Rig Veda, the highest authority for a Hindu of any sect whatever. Therein, asura means spiritual divine, and the word is used as a synonym for supreme spirit, while in the sense of a god, The term Asura is applied to Varuna and Indra, and preeminently to Agni, the three having been in days of old the three highest gods, before Brahmanical theomythology distorted the true meaning of almost everything in the archaic scriptures. But, as the key is now lost, the Asuras are hardly mentioned. In the Zendavesta, the same is found. In the Mazdian, or Magian religion, Asura is the Lord Asura Visvavedas, the all-knowing or omniscient Lord, and Asura Mazda became later Ahura Mazda, is, as Benfrey shows, the Lord who bestows intelligence, Asura Medha and Ahura Mazdao. Elsewhere in this work it is shown, on equally good authority, that the Indo-Iranian Asura was always regarded as sevenfold. In fact, combined with the name Mazda, as above, which makes the sevenfold Asura the Lord, or Lords, collectively, who bestow intelligence, connects the Amshatapins with the Asuras, and with our incarnating dying Kohans, as well as with the Elohim and the seven informing gods of Egypt, Chaldea, and every other country. Why these gods refuse to create men is not, as stated in exoteric accounts, because their pride was too great to share the celestial power with their essence with the children of the earth, but for reasons already suggested. However, allegory has indulged in endless fancies, and theology has taken advantage thereof in every country to make its case against these firstborn, or the Logoi, and to impress it as a truth on the minds of the ignorant and credulous. Compare also what is said about Makara and the Kumaras in connection with the zodiac. The Christian system is not the only one which has degraded them into demons. Zoroastrianism and even Brahmanism have profited thereby to obtain hold over the people's minds. Even in Chaldean exotericism, beings who refuse to create, in example, who are said to oppose thereby the demiurgos, are also denounced as spirits of darkness. The Suras, who win their intellectual independence, fight the Suras who are devoid thereof, who are shown in passing their lives in profitless ceremonial worship based on blind faith. A hint now ignored by the Orthodox Brahmins, and forthwith the former became a Suras. The first and mind-born sons of the deity refuse to create progeny and are cursed by Brahma to be born as men. They are hurled down to earth, which later on is transformed, in theological dogma, into the infernal regions. Ahriman destroys the bull created by Ormazd, which is the emblem of terrestrial, elusive life, the gem of sorrow, and, forgetting that the perishing finite seed must die, in order that the plant of immortality, the plant of spiritual, eternal life, should sprout and live, Ahriman is proclaimed the enemy, the opposing power, the devil. Typhon cuts Osiris into 14 pieces in order to prevent his peopling the world and thus creating misery. And Typhon becomes, in the exoteric theological teaching, the power of darkness. But all this is the exoteric shell. It is the worshippers of the latter who attribute to disobedience and rebellion the effort and self-sacrifice of those who would help men to their original status of divinity through self-conscious efforts, and it is these worshippers of form who have made demons of the angels of light. Esoteric philosophy, however, teaches that 1/3, footnote, whence the subsequent assertions of St. John's vision referred to in his apocalypse about the great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon their heads, whose tail drew the 3rd part of the stores of heaven and did cast them to the earth. That is a self-insertion, right? That is her explaining something. Now, I don't necessarily hold that the book of Revelation is the best authority on what is to come, although I do believe that John did have a revelation. I do believe that he saw something. I just think that he interpreted it wrong for various reasons that we talk about in the actual Bible study. But this is attributing something, right? You see something and you're like, oh, that kind of matches with what I already believe. And so you just insert it as though it is an absolute truth. Esoteric philosophy, however, teaches that 1/3 of the Dhyanis, in example, the 3 classes of the Arupa Pitris, endowed with intelligence, which is a formless breath composed of intellectual, not elementary substances, was simply doomed by the law of karma and evolution to be reborn, or incarnated, on earth. Footnote 2. The verse, did cast them to the earth, plainly shows its origin in the grandest and oldest of the allegory of the Aryan mystics, who, after the destruction of the Atlantean giants and sorcerers, concealed the truth, astronomical, physical, and divine, as it is a page out of pre-cosmic theogony, under various allegories. It is important to note right now that the only somewhat reliable account is a third-hand account of Atlantis. That account came to Plato through Socrates, through Solon, who heard it from a priest of Egypt. At no point in that revelation of this society was it even intimated that they were giants or sorcerers. That is something that is later attributions have led people to believe, but according to the source material, it is not mentioned. That is an important thing to maintain, and if I am wrong, if you have evidentiary proof of a first-hand account or even a third-hand account like Plato, where they say that the people who lived on Atlantis were giants or sorcerers, please drop that in the comments below so that I can check that out, because as far as I am aware, there is exactly one reference that can be attributed to antiquity and actual knowledge, right? Not, I heard this from Plato, or I extrapolated from what Plato said, but Plato said, I heard this from a guy who heard it from the priest in Egypt. Now, he told you straight out this is a third-hand account. Here is what they said. Everybody else makes up things, right? I have zero evidentiary reason to believe that the giants or sorcerers were from Atlantis. There is no reason to believe that. Now, you can believe that there were giants. I do. You can believe that they were even in the time of Atlantis. That is possible. You can believe that they were the Atlanteans. That is equally possible, but it is not recorded that that is so. That is something that is added later by people looking to confirm something which they already believe. Back to the text. We're still in the footnote. Its esoteric true interpretation is a veritable theodice of the fallen angels, so-called, the willing and the unwilling, the creators and those who refuse to create, being now mixed up most perplexingly by Christian Catholics, who forget that their highest archangel, Saint Michael, who is shown to conquer, to master, and to assimilate, the dragon of wisdom and of divine self-sacrifice, now miscalled and culminated as Satan, was the first to refuse to create. This led to endless confusion. So little does Christian theology understand the paradoxical language of the East and its symbolism, that it even explains, in its dead-letter sense, the Chinese Buddhist and Hindu exoteric rite of raising a noise during certain eclipses to scare away the great red dragon, which laid a plot to carry away the light. But here, light means esoteric wisdom, and we have sufficiently explained the secret meanings of the term dragon, serpent, etc., all of which refer to adepts and initiates. Where are we at? All right. Some of these were Nirmanakayas from other Manvantaras. Hence, we see them in all Puranas reappearing on this globe in the third Manvantara as kings, rishis, and heroes. Read Third Root Race. This tenet, being too philosophical and metaphysical to be grasped by the multitudes, was, as already stated, disfigured by the priesthood for the purpose of preserving a hold over them through superstitious fear. The supposed rebels, then, were simply those who, compelled by karmic law to drink the cup of gall to its last bitter drop, had to incarnate anew and thus make responsible thinking entities of the astral statues projected by their inferior brethren. Some are said to have refused because they had not in them the requisite materials. An example, an astral body, since they were arupa. The refusal of others had reference to their having been adepts and yogis of long past preceding Manvantaras. Another mystery. But later on, as Nirmanakayas, they sacrificed themselves for the good and salvation of the monads, which were waiting for their turn, and which otherwise would have had to linger for countless ages in irresponsible, animal-like, though in appearance human, forms. It may be a parable and an allegory within an allegory. Its solution is left to the intuition of the student, if he only reads that which follows with his spiritual eye. As to their fashioners, or ancestors, those angels who, in the exoteric legends, obeyed the law, they must be identical with the Barhishad Pitris, or the Petar Devata. In example, those possessed of the physical creative fire. They could only create, or rather clothe, the human monads with their own astral selves, but they could not make man in their image and likeness. Man must not be like one of us, say the creative gods, entrusted with the fabrication of the lower animal, but higher. See Genesis and Plato's Timaeus. I'm fairly positive that that is not contained within Timaeus. It has been several months since we read it, but I don't believe that that is part of that. It may be. I can be wrong. It is part of Genesis, kind of, but I'm not sure about this reference at all. They're They're creating the semblance of men out of their own divine essence means, esoterically, that it is they who become the first race, and thus shared its destiny and further evolution. They would not, simply because they could not, give to man that sacred spark which burns and expands into the flower of human reason and self-consciousness. For they had it not to give. This was left to that class of devas who became symbolized in Greece under the name Prometheus. To those who had naught to do with the physical body, yet everything to do with the purely spiritual man. See Part 2 of this volume, The Fallen Angels, and also The Gods of Light Proceed from the Gods of Darkness. Each class of creators endows man with what it has to give. The one builds his external form, the other gives him his essence, which later on becomes the human higher self, owing to the personal exertion of the individual. But they could not make men as they were themselves, perfect, because sinless. Sinless because having only the first pale, shadowy outlines of attributes, and these all perfect, from the human standpoint, white, pure and cold as the virgin snow. Where there is no struggle, there is no merit. That is the entirety of the reason for struggle on the mortal plane, and therefore perfection is not something incarnate. Humanity of the earthy was not destined to be created by the angels of the first divine breath. Therefore they are said to have refused to do so, and man had to be formed by more material creators. Footnote. In spite of all the efforts to the contrary, Christian theology, having burdened itself with the Hebrew esoteric account of the creation of man, which is understood literally, cannot find any reasonable excuse for its God, the Creator, who produces a man devoid of mind and sense, nor can it justify the punishments following an act for which Adam and Eve might plead non-compos. For if the couple is admitted to be ignorant of good and evil before the eating of the forbidden fruit, how could it be expected to know that disobedience was evil? It goes much deeper than that. See Genesis. If primeval man was meant to remain a half-witted or rather witless being, then his creation was aimless and even cruel, if produced by an omnipotent and perfect God. But Adam and Eve are shown even in Genesis to be created by a lower class of divine beings, the Elohim, who are so jealous of their personal prerogatives as reasonable and intelligent creatures, that they will not allow a man to become as one of us. This is plain even from the dead-letter meaning of the Bible. The Gnostics, then, were right in regarding the Jewish God as belonging to a class of lower, material, and not very holy denizens of the invisible world. I agree with that. Man had to be formed by more material creators who, in their turn, could only give what they had in their own natures and no more. Subservient to eternal law, the pure gods could only project out of themselves shadowy men, a little less ethereal and spiritual, less divine and perfect than themselves, shadows still. The first humanity, therefore, was a pale copy of its progenitors, too material, even in its ethereality, to be a hierarchy of gods, too spiritual and pure to be men, endowed as it is with every negative, or guna, perfection. Perfection, to be fully such, must be born out of imperfection. The incorruptible must grow out of the corruptible, having the latter as its vehicle and basis in contrast. Absolute light is absolute darkness, and vice versa. In fact, there is neither light nor darkness in the realms of truth. Good and evil are twins, the progeny of space and time, under the sway of Maya. Separate them by cutting off one from the other, and they will both die. Neither exists per se, since each has to be generated and created out of the other in order to come into being. Both must be known and appreciated before becoming objects of perception. Hence, in the mortal mind, they must be divided. Nevertheless, as the illusionary distinction exists, it requires a lower order of creative angels to create inhabited globes, especially ours, or to deal with matter on this earthly plane. The philosophical Gnostics were the first to think so in the historical period, and to invent various systems upon this theory. Therefore, in their schemes of creation, one always finds their creators occupying a place at the very foot of the ladder of spiritual being. With them, those who created our earth and its mortals were placed on the very limit of myopic matter, and their followers were taught to think, to the great disgust of the church fathers, that for the creation of those wretched races, in a spiritual and moral sense, which grace our globe, no high divinity could be made responsible, but only angels of a low hierarchy. Footnote. In Isis Unveiled, several of these Gnostic systems are given. One is taken from the Codex Nazareus, the scriptures of the Nazarenes, who, although they existed long before the days of Christ, and even before the laws of Moses, were Gnostics, and many of them initiates. They held their mysteries of life in Nazara, ancient and modern Nazareth, and their doctrines are a faithful echo of the teachings of the secret doctrine, some of which we are now endeavoring to explain. But only angels of a low hierarchy, to which class they relegated the Jewish god, Jehovah. Mankind's different from the present are mentioned in all the ancient cosmogonies. Plato speaks in the Phaedrus of a winged race of men. We have not covered the Phaedrus yet. As Aristophanes, in Plato's Banquet, speaks of a race androgynous and with round bodies. In Pymander, we have done that one, all the animal kingdom even is double-sexed. Thus, in chapter 18, it is said, "The circuit having been accomplished, the knot was loosened, and all the animals, which were equally androgynous, were united, separated, together with man. For the causes had to produce effects on earth." Footnote 2. See the translation from the Greek by François Mongeau de Foix, Everesque d'Art, the work dedicated to Marguerite de France, Reine de Navarre, edition of 1579, Bordeaux. Again, in the ancient Quiche manuscript, the Popol Vuh, published by the late Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg, the first men are described as a race whose sight was unlimited and who knew all things at once, thus showing the divine knowledge of gods, not mortals. The secret doctrine, correcting the unavoidable exaggerations of popular fancy, gives the facts as they are recorded in the archaic symbol. It is important to note, right, that this divine knowledge of gods is not necessarily restricted to gods. It can be said that we possess that knowledge now, the knowledge of the DNA and how to manipulate that, which was definitely not part of a whole conspiracy going around about something that you needed to take into your body, which would snip your DNA and change it in a way that was sometimes intentional. That wouldn't be considered divine knowledge at all, would it? How about the ability to inseminate something and insert it into another person in the manner that we do in IVF, right? How about the ability to cure a sickness or to perform surgery on internal organs and have the person survive? All of those things in antiquity would be known as the knowledge of the gods. And so it is not necessarily a thing that it was a divine being that had greater knowledge than the people of antiquity possessed. We do not, as of yet, have any time travel devices, but that does not mean that it is not a possibility in the far future. And in the instance that there was a singular person sent from today back into 5,000 years ago in the time of Plato, every single thing, like if me, Jeremy, if I was sent back to the time of Plato, they would think I was a god. I would be able to do all kinds of things that they would just be like, hydrostatics, understanding how to move water through air pressure, that's a thing. I can do that. How to heat and cool a house with fire, I can do that. Like, how to create fertilizers, I know how to do that. How to perform some types of surgery, I would not recommend trying it, but I have at least the conceptual knowledge that would be required. There are many things which I possess knowledge of, which even 200 years ago, in the time where she was writing this, would be miracles, right? The understanding of how science works in and of itself, the basic fundamentals that you learn in primary school, those would be miraculous in the days of Plato. And so, somebody with greater knowledge does not necessarily mean it is a divine being. It can be an alien. It can be a time traveler. I understand that both of those things are highly unlikely, but it's still something that needs to be considered. So this divine knowledge of gods, not necessarily. What evidence do we have of divine knowledge, right? We have, if you go by the Bible, we have a God that is continuously confounded by people, does not understand their decisions whatsoever, or even that they can make those decisions, right? We see that pattern repeated. People attributing to some being immortality, but they're not omniscient, they're not omnipresent, they don't have all of these things that a divine being would have, but they're divine because they have better knowledge. They can do things that you can't. Some of it may even have been tools, right? If we are talking about some time travel anomaly that happens 1,000 years in the future, they probably have a laser, right? They probably have some device that'll shoot a fire and burn people. Well, that would absolutely be considered miraculous. These are all speculations, but it's speculations that need to be explored before you go, well, that's a god. Back to the text. B. These shadows were born, each of his own color and kind, each also inferior to his creator, because the latter was a complete being of his kind. He was complete without any faults. The commentaries will refer the first sentence to the color or complexion of each human race thus evolved. In Pymander, the 7 primitive men, created by nature from the heavenly man, all partake of the qualities of the 7 governors or rulers who loved men, and their own reflection and synthesis. In the Norse legends, one recognizes in Asgard, the habitat of the gods, as also in the Aces themselves, the same mystical loci and personifications woven into the popular myths as in our secret doctrine. And we find them in the Vedas, the Puranas, the Mazdean scriptures, and the Kabbalah. The Ases of Scandinavia, the rulers of the world which preceded ours, whose name means literally the pillars of the world. Its supports are thus identical with the Greek cosmocratores, the 7 workmen or rectors of Pymander, the 7 rishis or pitras of India, the 7 Chaldean gods, and 7 evil spirits, the 7 Kabbalistic Sephiroth, synthesized by the Upper Triad, and even the 7 planetary spirits of the Christian mystics. The Ases create the earth, the seas, the sky, and the clouds, the whole visible world, from the remains of the slain giant Ymir. But they do not create man, but only his form from the ask or ash tree. It is Odin who endows him with life and soul. Odin, by the way, is a representative of what? Lightning? Okay, I got you. It is Odin who endows him with life and soul, after Lodur had given him blood and bones, and finally it is Honir who furnishes him with his intellect, Manas, and with his conscious sense. The Norse ask, the Hesiod ash tree, whence issued the men of the generation of bronze, the 3rd root race, and the Tziti tree of the Popol Vuh, out of which the Mexican 3rd race of men was created, are all one. Footnote. See Max Muller's review of the Popol Vuh. This may be plainly seen by any reader, but the occult reason why the Norse Yggdrasil, the Hindu Aswatha, the Gogard, the Hellenic Tree of Life, the Tibetan Zampoon, are one with the Kabbalistic Sephiroth tree, and even with the holy tree made by Ahura Mazda and the Tree of Eden, who among the Western scholars can tell? Footnote 2. Mr. James Dormester, the translator of the Vendidad, speaking of it, says, "The tree, whatever it is, nevertheless, the fruit of all those trees, whether papala or haoma, or yet the more prosaic apple, are the plants of life, in fact and verity. The prototypes of our races were all enclosed in the microcosmic tree, which grew and developed within and under the great mundane macrocosmic tree." Footnote 3 is Plato's Timaeus. Again, we have done that. It is part of the Ancient Lore playlist. And the mystery is half revealed in the Dirghotamas, where it is said, "Pipala, the sweet fruit of that tree upon which come spirits who love the science, and where the gods produce all marvels, as in the Gogard, among the luxuriant branches of all those mundane trees, the serpent dwells. But while the macrocosmic tree is the serpent of eternity and of absolute wisdom itself, those who dwell in the microcosmic tree are the serpents of the manifested wisdom. One is the one in all. The others are its reflected parts. The tree is man himself, of course, and the serpents dwelling in each, the conscious manas, the connecting link between spirit and matter, heaven and earth. Everywhere it is the same. The creating powers produce man, but fail in their final object. All these logoi strive to endow man with a conscious, immortal spirit reflected in the mind, manas, alone. They fail, and they are all represented as being punished for the failure, if not for the attempt. What is the nature of the punishment? A sentence of imprisonment in the lower or nether region, which is our earth, the lowest in its chain, and eternity, meaning the duration of a life cycle, in the darkness of matter or within animal man. And again, I completely disagree with this in entirety. It has pleased the half-ignorant and half-designing church fathers to disfigure the graphic symbol. They took advantage of the metaphor and the allegory found in every old religion to turn them to the benefit of the new one. Thus, man was transformed into the darkness of a material hell. His divine consciousness, obtained from his indwelling principle, the manasa, or the incarnated deva, became the glaring flames of the infernal region, and our globe that hell itself. Pipala, Hyoma, the fruit of the tree of knowledge, were denounced as the forbidden fruit, and the serpent of wisdom, the voice of reason and consciousness, remained identified for ages with the fallen angel, which is the old dragon, the devil. The same for the other high symbols. The swastika, the most sacred and mystic symbol in India, the Jaina cross, as it is now called by the Masons, notwithstanding its direct connection or even identity with the Christian cross, has become dishonored in the same manner. It is the devil's sign, we are told by the Indian missionaries. Does it not shine on the head of the great serpent of Vishnu, or on the thousand-headed Shesha Ananta, in the depths of Patala, the Hindu Naraka, or hell? It does, but what is Anatta? As Sesha, it is the almost endless manvantaric cycle of time, and becomes infinite time itself, when called Anatta, the great seven-headed serpent on which rests Vishnu, the eternal deity, during pralayic inactivity. What has Satan to do with this highly metaphysical symbol? The swastika is the most philosophically scientific of all symbols, and also the most comprehensible. It is the summary, in a few lines, of the whole work of creation, or evolution, as one should say, from cosmotheogony down to anthropogeny, from the indivisible, unknown Parabrahm to the humble moneron of materialistic science, whose genesis is as unknown to that science as is that of the all-deity itself. The swastika is found heading the religious symbols of every old nation. The swastika is the representation of logos. We talked about that yesterday or the day before. One of the more recent videos, we actually had the picture up there to show. But if you take the Tau cross, which is the even-armed four-sided cross, and you place a pencil at all four of the points, and then you twist it, the lines that are drawn become the swastika, right? It is tilted and it draws a little line down. That is a representation of movement. Movement is a representation of logos. And so the swastika is a representation of logos. It has been co-opted by a certain group, the Nazis, and because of that, somehow, we have gotten that banned in all kinds of places. you're not allowed to use the swastika, despite the fact that that symbol is just as old as humanity itself. And so, maybe that was an intentional choice made by controlling powers in order to keep you from learning something. I wonder if maybe that is a possibility that could very likely be. I wonder. Back to the text. It is the worker's hammer in the Chaldean Book of Numbers, the hammer just referred to in the Book of the Concealed Mystery, which striketh sparks from the flint space. Those sparks becoming worlds, that would be Logos in action, wouldn't it? It is Thor's hammer, the magic weapon forged by the dwarfs against the giants, or the pre-cosmic titanic forces of nature, which rebel, and while alive in the region of matter, will not be subdued by the gods, the agents of universal harmony, but have first to be destroyed. This is why the world is formed out of the relics of the murdered Ymir. The swastika is the Mjolnir, the storm hammer, the representation of lightning or change in action. Color me surprised. And, therefore, it is said that when the Asses, the holy gods, after having been purified by fire, the fire of passions and suffering in their life incarnations, become fit to dwell in Ida in eternal peace, then Mjolnir will become useless. This will be when the bonds of Hel, the goddess queen of the region of the dead, will bind them no longer, for the kingdom of evil will have passed away. Surtur's flames had not destroyed them, nor yet had the raging waters of the several deluges. Then came the sons of Thor. They brought Mjolnir with them, no longer as a weapon of war, but as the hammer with which to consecrate the new heaven and the new earth. Isn't that interesting? Footnote. Oh look, they got the swastika here. See, Asgard and the gods, the renewal of the world. Verily, many are its meanings. In the macrocosmic work, the hammer of creation, with its four arms bent at right angles, refers to the continual motion and revolution of the invisible cosmos of forces. In that, the manifested cosmos in our earth, it points to the rotation in the cycles of time of the world's axes and their equatorial belts. The two lines forming the swastika, meaning spirit and matter. The four hooks suggesting the motion in the revolving cycles. Isn't that what I just said? Applied to the microcosm, man, it shows him to be a link between heaven and earth. That is a self-insertion. The right hand being raised at the end of a horizontal arm, the left pointing to the earth. What are the legs doing? What is the head doing? That is an anthropomorphization that is not necessarily needed to be attributed to this. In the Smaragdine Tablet of Hermes, the uplifted right hand is inscribed with the word solve, the left with the word coagula. It is at one and the same time an alchemical, cosmogonical, anthropological, and magical sign with 7 keys to its inner meaning. It is not too much to say that the compound symbolism of this universal and most suggestive of signs contains the key to the 7 great mysteries of cosmos, born in the mystical conceptions of the early Aryans, and by them placed at the very threshold of eternity, on the head of the serpent, Aneta. It found its spiritual death in the scholastic interpretations of medieval anthropomorphists. It is the alpha and omega of universal creative force. Actually, it would probably be beta, right? Alpha being the existence thereof, omega being the dissolution thereof. The logos, or the swastika, is the period in between those 2 points. Everything moving between the beginning and the end is the logos. And so This is not correct, right? It is not the Alpha and Omega. It would be everything between Alpha and Omega, right? Including Alpha and including Omega, right? There is no beginning unless there is a Logos. There is no ending unless there was a Logos. And so it is included with Alpha and Omega, but it is not the Alpha and Omega. The Alpha and Omega is the substance that it is made from. And yes, in a way that is the same, because there is the active and the inactive. It is in the state of inactivity. It is in the state of stasis, which is indivisible from movement, right? Before there is movement, there is stasis, and after there is movement, there is stasis. They are two sides of the same coin, much like several other things that we talk about. And so the distinction is a subtle one, but it is a necessary one. It is the action in motion outside of the stasis. Right? The originating point is the beginning, which is stasis. All things created, not changing. The next point, the very next point in time from that is the Logos. Right? Inseparable, but now there is motion. If that explanation is a little bit too confusing for you, I suggest that you check out the Science of Logic, which is talking about this in a slightly different manner, and which we are also doing. It is the key to the cycle of science, divine and human, and he who comprehends its full meaning is forever liberated from the toils of Mahamaya, the great illusion and deceiver. That is because you find out it is not an illusion at that point. The light that shines from under the divine hammer, now degraded into the mallet or gavel of the Grand Masters of Masonic lodges, is sufficient to dissipate the darkness of any human schemes or fictions. How prophetic are the songs of the three Norse goddesses, to whom the ravens of Odin whispered of the past and of the future, as they flutter around in their abode of crystal beneath the flowing river. The songs are all written down in the scrolls of wisdom, of which many are lost, but some still remain, and they repeat in poetical allegory the teachings of the archaic ages. To summarize from Dr. Wagner's Asgard and the Gods, the renewal of the world, which is a prophecy about the seventh race of our round, told in the past tense. The Mjolnir had done its duty in this round, and on the field of Ida, the field of resurrection, for the fifth round, the sons of the highest gods assembled, and in them their fathers rose again, the egos of all their past incarnations. They talked of the past and the present, and remembered the wisdom and prophecies of their ancestors, which had all been fulfilled. Near them, but unseen of them, was the strong, the mighty one who rules all things, and ordains the eternal laws that govern the world. They all knew he was there, they felt his presence and his power, but were ignorant of his name. At his command the new earth rose out of the waters of space. To the south, above the field of Ida, he made another heaven called Odlang, and further off a third, Widbling. Over Gimmel's cave, a wondrous palace was erected, covered with gold and shining bright in the sun. These are the three gradually ascending planets of our chain. There the gods were enthroned, as they used to be. From Gimmel's height, the seventh planet or globe, the highest and the purest, they looked down upon the happy descendants of Lif and Lifthrasir, the coming Adam and Eve of purified humanity, and signed to them to climb up higher, to rise in knowledge and wisdom step by step, from one heaven to another, until they were at last fit to be united to the gods in the house of the All-Father. But if they were purified humanity and they were perfect, then there was no need for the temptation or the fall or for them to learn anything. He who knows the doctrines of esoteric Buddhism, or wisdom, though so imperfectly sketched hitherto, will clearly see the allegory contained in the above. Its more philosophical meaning will be better understood if the reader thinks carefully over the myth of Prometheus. It is examined further on. Further on in the light of the Hindu Pramanta, degraded into a purely physiological symbol by some Orientalists and taken in connection with the terrestrial fire only. Their interpretation is an insult to every religion, including Christianity, whose greatest mystery is thus dragged down to matter. The friction of divine Pramanta and Arani could suggest itself under this image only to the brutal conceptions of the German materialists, than whom there are none worse. Well, that come true a little bit later too. This was pre-World War I, much less World War II. It is true that the divine babe, Agni, with the Sanskrit-speaking race, who became Ignis with the Latins, is born from the conjunction of Pramanta and Arani, Svastika, during the sacrificial ceremony. But what of that? Twashriti Vishwakaraman is the divine artist and carpenter. Footnote. The father of the sacred fire, writes Professor Jolly, is Twashriti. His mother was Maya. He himself was styled Acta, anointed Christos. After the priest had poured upon his head the spirituous soma, and on his body butter purified by sacrifice. The source of his information is not given by the French Darwinist, but the lines are quoted to show that light begins to dawn even upon the materialist. Adalbert Kuhn, in his Die Herkunft des Führers, identifies the two signs, the swastika by itself and the swastika with 4 points, with Arani, and designates them under this name. He adds, this process of kindling fire naturally led men to the idea of sexual reproduction. Really? Why could not a more dignified idea, and one more occult, have led men to invent that symbol, insofar as it is connected, in one of its aspects, with human reproduction? But its chief symbolism refers to cosmogony. Agni, in the condition of Acta, is anointed, is suggestive of Christ, remarks Professor Jolly. Maya, Mary, his mother. Twastri, St. Joseph, the carpenter of the Bible. In the Rig Veda, Vishwakarman is the highest and oldest of the gods and their father. He is the carpenter or builder, because God is called even by the monotheist the architect of the universe. Still, the original idea is purely metaphysical and had no connection with the later phallicism. Twashriti is the divine artist and carpenter, and is also the father of the gods and the creative fire in the Vedas. So ancient is the symbol and so sacred that there is hardly an excavation made on the sites of old cities without its being found. A number of such terracotta discs, called fuselios, were found by Dr. Schliemann under the ruins of ancient Troy. Both these forms, the swastika and the Nintendo control pad, were excavated in great abundance, and their presence being one more proof that the ancient Trojans and their ancestors were pure Aryans. Now, these symbols are similar, right? But not the same. The swastika depicts motion. The Nintendo controller does not, right? It depicts the 4 directions. It depicts the spiritual and the earthly. I will grant that. But it does not depict the motion, which is the lines, the 90-degree angles, coming off of the initial cross. It has the representation of the heavens, which, by the way, is those dots, right? The dots symbolize the earth moving through the 4 quarters of the year. That is the best interpretation of this particular swastika. The other one is simply logos. This one is logos in control of the planet. But these two symbols are not the same. They are close, they are similar, but one is the derivative of the other. C. Kakaya, as already explained, is the astral image. It bears this meaning in Sanskrit works. Thus, Sanjana, the spiritual consciousness, is the wife of Surya, the sun, is shown retiring into the jungle to lead an ascetic life, and leaving behind to her husband her Kakaya, shadow or image. 16. How are the real Manushas born, the Manus with minds? How are they made? A. The fathers, Bar Hishad, called to their help with their own fire, the Kavayava Hana, electric fire, which is the fire which burns in earth. The spirit of the earth called to his help the solar fire, Suki, the spirit in the sun. These three, the Pitras and the two fires, produced in their joint efforts a good rupa. It, the form, could stand, walk, run, recline, and fly. Yet it was still but a kakaya, a shadow with no sense. A. Here, an explanation again becomes necessary in the light, and with the help of the exoteric, added to the esoteric scriptures. The Manushayas, men, and the Manus are here equivalent to the Chaldean Adam. This term not meaning at all the first man, as with the Jews, or one solitary individual, but mankind collectively, as with the Chaldeans and Assyrians. That would be Adamu. It is the four orders or classes of Dayan Kohans out of the seven, says the commentary. Who are the progenitors of the concealed man? In example, the subtle inner man. The Laha of the moon, the lunar spirits were, as already stated, only the ancestors of his form. In example, of the model according to which nature began her external work upon him. Thus, primitive man was, when he appeared, only a senseless bhuta, or a phantom. Footnote. It is not clear why bhutas should be rendered by the Orientalists as meaning evil spirits in the Puranas. In the Vishnu Purana, Book 1, Chapter 5, the slokalist simply says, Bhutas, fiends, frightful from being monkey-colored and carnivorous. And I wonder, fiends implies bad, right? That is something acting against the best interest of humankind is a fiend. Frightful means scary. It was monkey-colored and carnivorous. And so, I guess it would have a reason why it would be called an evil spirit. You think? And the word in India now means ghosts, ethereal or astral phantoms, while in esoteric teaching it means elementary substances, something made of attenuated, non-compound essence, and, specifically, the astral double of any man or animal. In this case, these primitive men are the doubles of the first ethereal Dhyanis or Pitras. This creation was a failure, the reason of which will be explained in the commentary on Sloka 20. B. This attempt was, again, a failure. It allegorizes the vanity of physical nature's unaided attempts to construct even a perfect animal, let alone man. For the fathers, the lower angels, are all nature spirits, and the higher elementals also possess an intelligence of their own. But this is not enough to construct a thinking man. Living fire was needed, that fire which gives the human mind its self-perception and self-consciousness, or manas. And the progeny of Parvaka and Suki are the animal, electric, and solar fires, which create animals, and could thus furnish but a physical living constitution to that first astral model of man. The first creators, then, were the Pygmalions of primeval man. They failed to animate the statue intellectually. This stanza, we shall see, is very suggestive. It explains the mystery of and fills the gap between the informing principle in man, the higher self or human monad, and the animal monad, both one and the same, although the former is endowed with divine intelligence, the latter with instinctual faculty alone. How is this difference to be explained, and the presence of that higher self in man accounted for? The sons of Mahat are the quickeners of the human plant. They are the waters falling upon the arid soil of latent life, and the spark that vivifies the human animal. They are the lords of spiritual life eternal. In the beginning, in the second race, some of the lords only breathed of their essence into Manushya, men, and some took in men their abode. This shows that not all men became incarnations of the divine rebels, but only a few among them. The remainder had their fifth principle simply quickened by the spark thrown into it, which accounts for the great differences between the intellectual capacities of men and races. Had not the sons of Mahat, speaking allegorically, skipped the intermediate worlds in their impulse towards intellectual freedom, the animal man would never have been able to reach upward from this earth and attain, through self-exertion, his ultimate goal. The cyclic pilgrimage would have to be performed through all the planes of existence, half unconsciously, if not entirely so, as in the case of the animals. It is owing to this rebellion of intellectual life against the morbid inactivity of pure spirit that we are what we are, self-conscious, thinking men with the capabilities and attributes of gods in us, for good as much as for evil. Hence, the rebels are our saviors. Let the philosopher ponder well over this, and more than one mystery will become clear to him. It is only by the attractive force of the contrast that the two opposites, spirit and matter, can be cemented on earth, and, smelted in the fire of self-conscious experience and suffering, find themselves wedded in eternity. This will reveal the meaning of the many hitherto incomprehensible allegories, foolishly called fables, vide infra the secret of Satan. It explains, to begin with, the statement made in Pymander that the heavenly man, the son of the Father, who partook of the nature and essence of the seven governors or creators and rulers of the material world, peeped through the harmony and breaking through the seven circles of fire, made manifest the downward-born nature. Footnote. See Pymander, Book 2. It explains every verse in that Hermetic narrative, as also the Greek allegory of Prometheus. Most important of all, it explains the many allegorical accounts about the wars in heaven, including that of Revelation with respect to the Christian dogma of the fallen angels. It explains the rebellion of the oldest and highest angels and the meaning of their being cast down from heaven into the depths of hell. In example, matter. It even solves the recent perplexity of the Assyriologists who expressed their wonder through the late George Smith. My first idea of this part of the rebellion, he says, was that the wars with the powers of evil preceded the creation. I now think it followed the account of the fall, Chaldean account of Genesis. In this work, Mr. George Smith gives an engraving from an early Babylonian cylinder of the sacred tree, the serpent, man, and woman. The tree has 7 branches, 3 on the man's side, 4 on that of the female. The branches are typical of the 7 root races, in the third of which, at its very close, occurred the separation of the sexes and the so-called fall into generation. The 3 earliest races were sexless, then hermaphrodite, the other 4 male and female as distinct from each other. The dragon, says Mr. G. Smith, which in the Chaldean account of creation leads man to sin, is the creation of Tiamat, the living principle of the sea, or chaos, which was opposed to the deities at the creation of the world. This is an error. The dragon is the male principle, or phallus, personified, or rather animalized, and Tiamat, the embodiment of the spirit of chaos, of the deep, or abyss, is the female principle, the womb. The spirit of chaos and disorder refers to the mental perturbation which it led to. It is the sensual, attractive, magnetic principle which fascinates and seduces, the ever-living element that throws the whole world into disorder, chaos, and sin. The serpent seduces the woman, but it is the latter who seduces man, and both are included in the karmic curse, though only as a natural result of the cause produced, says George Smith. It is clear that the dragon is included in the curse for the fall, and that the gods, the Elohim, jealous at seeing the man of clay becoming a creator in his turn, like all the animals, invoke on the head of the human race all the evils which inflict humanity. Wisdom and knowledge shall injure him, he shall have family quarrels, he will anger the gods, he shall submit to tyranny, he shall be disappointed in his desires, he shall pour out useless prayers, he shall commit future sin. No doubt subsequent lines continue this topic, but again our narrative is broken, and it reopens only where the gods are preparing for war with the powers of evil, which are led by Tiamat, the woman. Babylonian legend of creation. This account is omitted in Genesis for monotheistic purposes, but it is mistaken policy, born no doubt of fear and regard for dogmatic religion and its superstitions, to have sought to restore the Chaldean fragments by Genesis, whereas it is the latter far younger than any of the fragments, which ought to be explained by the former. 17. The breath, human monad, needed a form. The fathers gave it. The breath needed a gross body. The earth molded it. The breath needed the spirit of life. The solar lahas breathed it into its form. The breath needed a mirror of its body, astral shadow. We gave it our own, said the Dhyanis. The breath needed a vehicle of desires, Kamarupa. It has it, said the drainer of waters, Suki, the fire of passion and animal instinct. The breath needs a mind to embrace the universe. We cannot give that, said the fathers. I never had it, said the spirit of the earth. The form would be consumed were I to give it mine, said the great solar fire, nascent. Man remained an empty, senseless Bhuta. Thus have the boneless given life to those who became, later, men with bones in the third race. As a full explanation is found in stanza 5, vide paragraph A, a few remarks will now suffice. The father of primitive physical man, or of his body, is the vital electric principle residing in the sun. The moon is its mother because of that mysterious power in the moon which has as decided an influence upon human gestation and generation, which it regulates, as it has on the growth of plants and animals. We're going to hit that real quick. It is true that the female cycle does indeed correlate with the lunar cycle, but it is not ruled by it. If it was ruled by the moon, then every single woman on the planet would start their period on the same day. Not, as it currently is, somebody different starting on different days, right? If you have, for instance, 30 women who do not live together, there is the possibility that each one of them will start on a different day of the week, right, or of the month. That means that it's not ruled by the moon. If it was ruled by the moon, what would happen is, at the moment when the moon became full, for instance, every woman on the planet would start bleeding. If it was ruled by the moon, it would be subject to the moon. It's not. It's just a correlation. And correlation does not equal causation. It is true. The cycle is the same. It may even have some effect, but it is not ruled by in the way that the oceans are. Every single time that the moon does this, the ocean follows it. And when it moves across, it follows it again. There is a reason we have tides. That is a direct ruling of the oceans by the moon. It is not the same for women. Yes, there is a correlation, but it is not necessarily causation. Back to the text. The wind, or ether, standing in this case for the agent of transmission by which those influences are carried down from the two luminaries and diffused upon earth, is referred to as the nurse, whose spiritual fire alone makes of man a divine and perfect entity. Now, what is that spiritual fire? In alchemy, it is hydrogen. No. In general, why in esoteric actuality, it is the emanation, or the ray, which proceeds from its noumenon, the dian of the first element. Hydrogen is a gas only on our terrestrial plane, but even in chemistry, hydrogen would be the only existing form of matter in all sense of the term. Footnote. The See Genesis of the Elements by Professor W. Crooks. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop, even though we're in the middle of a sentence. This is simply patently untrue, but we can only say that now because we have the lens of history, right? We have already shown that the primary element is helium, not hydrogen. Hydrogen is 222, atomic weight of 2. Helium is atomic weight of 1, 111. That is the primary. And so this is wrong prima facie, right? Straight off the top. But that is because they didn't have an understanding. And then again, understanding has come through time. Hydrogen is an element. It was one of the first ones which we isolated. Hydrogen and oxygen were our first isolations through the alchemical process. And so, for alchemy, at this point in time, it was indeed hydrogen. But that's because they hadn't found helium yet. They had not yet devised the way of maintaining and acquiring this particular element. We do have the element. Not only that, but we know that the element is indeed the first one. Right? It is the smallest division of the proton, neutron, and electron that we can possibly have, so it has to be the first one. Hydrogen is a gas only on our terrestrial plane. I can grant that one because pressure and temperature do indeed have a correlation to the primary state of hydrogen. I don't even know, is liquid hydrogen a thing? Like, I know that we can liquefy, well, I'm sure we can. I'm not aware of it, right? I know that we can liquefy helium. I know that we can liquefy oxygen, nitrogen, and most of the other gases. And so it is entirely likely and even probable that we can with hydrogen. I just don't know that, right? And so I'm not going to state that as a fact. But we do know that there is a direct correlation between pressure and temperature with the presenting state of matter. If you change the pressure in a water vessel, you can freeze the vessel or you can boil it without even adding extra heat or removing the heat. Simply by changing the pressure, you change the correlation, and it will indeed change the state of matter. And so this is in part correct, but it is in part not correct. All right. In our sense of the term, and it is very nearly allied to the protyle, which is our liam. And also, right, it is not the fire, right? It is not the spiritual fire. What is the spiritual fire? It is the process of change that happens to the elements. Now, my theory on the spirit is that it has the two forms. We already hit that, right? Active and inactive. The inactive state is quite literally every single atom in existence, including the ones inside of you and me, all at the exact same time in relation to each other, statically, with no movement whatsoever. If you were to take a picture of all of creation, that moment is the inactive spirit. Within that spirit lies the potential for change. That potential is enacted by ionic changes. Now, what is an ionic change? You have a proton, a neutron, and an electron. The proton is what determines which element it is. 1 proton equals helium, 2 protons equals hydrogen. The neutrons can vary a little bit. You can gain one, you can lose one. These are called isotopes. So you can have a hydrogen element that has 1 neutron, 2 protons, or you can have one that has 2 neutrons, 2 protons, or you can have one that has 3 neutrons, 2 protons. The protons is the determining factor. From that, you have electrons, which encircle that. Now, my thought theory on this is there is a size correlation between these things, right? The proton is a little bit bigger than the neutron and significantly bigger than the electron. The exact correlation of that is 1, 8, 3, 6. That is the exact correlation of mass between a proton and an electron. The electron is spinning around. Much like the neutron, you can have extra or lesser electrons. This is the process of ionization. If you pick up extra electrons, you are ionized with an extra charge. It's a little bit more electrically active. That is the spiritual fire. That ionization is potential for molecularization, which means if you take hydrogen times 2 and you put it next to an oxygen times 1, it can form a molecule which is called water. The process by which those things bind is through the electrical charge. The hydrogen binds electrically with the oxygen, creating the molecule that is water. That process of the binding is the fire. This charge goes to this, and it is a transfer between the two, which binds the two together. That is the process of the spiritual fire being enacted. All of the atoms at once in stasis is the entirety of the Holy Spirit. The potential being actuated is still the Holy Spirit, but now it is the Holy Spirit in an active form. The process of change. Every single instance of light, heat, fire, water, change, anything that has to do with movement in any capacity is through the spiritual fire. When you make a decision to wiggle your fingers, you don't do it. You're the soul. You make the decision. The temple is your navigation device. But you, as the soul, tell the body, I want to do this, and an electrical charge goes from your brain to your fingers. That is the spiritual fire enacting change. I needed to clarify that because it's brought to light by the text. That is an important part. And it is very nearly allied to protyle, which is our liam. It is the father and generator, so to say, or rather the upadi basis of both air and water. I agree. And is fire, air, and water. I agree. In fact, one under 3 aspects. I agree. Hence the chemical and alchemical trinity. In the world of manifestation or matter, it is the objective symbol and the material emanation from the subjective and purely spiritual entitative being in the region of noumena. Well might Godfrey Higgins have compared hydrogen to, and even identified it with, the two on, the one of the Greeks. For, as he remarks, hydrogen is not water, though it generates it. Hydrogen is not fire, though it manifests or creates it. No, and right, it can be changed by it. Right, the process of fire is merely changing this into another form. This is a visible sign that that change is happening. It is not the driver of it. And so the butane in here is being transformed into carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide and several other different compounds and molecules. The fire is just the visible response. It is the visible symbol that the change is taking place. There are changes that take place in the exact same manner that don't have enough energetic change between the two to produce visible light. Just because you don't see the light doesn't mean that the light is not there, right? The addition of heat in a soldering iron, for instance, is bringing electricity into it, exciting the molecules. But unless you are doing it entirely wrong, the metal on the soldering iron doesn't actually turn red. You don't actually see the light emanate from it. You can, however, notice the waves like a mirage that come off of it from the heat. That is the not quite visible effect of change being shown. In the world of manifestation, the matter is the objective symbol and the material emanation from the subject and purely spiritual entitative being in the region of noumena. Oh wait, all right. Where are we at? Hydrogen is not fire, though it manifests or creates it. It does not, right? It is shown, the change is shown by the fire. It does not manifest the fire. Nor is it air. Though air may be regarded as a product of the union of water and fire, since hydrogen is found in the aqueous element of the atmosphere. It is 3 in 1. If one studies comparative theogony, it is easy to find that the secret of these fires was taught in the mysteries of every ancient people, preeminently in Samothrace. There is not the smallest doubt that the Kaberi, the most arcane of all the ancient deities, gods, and men, great deities and titans, are identical with the Kumaras and Rudras headed by Kartikeya, a Kumara also. This is quite evident even exoterically, and these Hindu deities were, like the Kabiri, the personified sacred fires of the most occult powers of nature. The several branches of the Aryan race, the Asiatic and the European, the Hindu and the Greek, did their best to conceal their true nature, if not their importance. As in the case of the Kumaras, the number of the Kabiri is uncertain. Some say there were only 3 or 4, others say 7. Askyrios, Atiosera, Atiochersis, and Camillus may very well stand for the alter egos of the 4 Kumaras, Sanat Kumara, Sananda, Sanaka, and Sanatana. The former deities, whose reputed father was Vulcan, was often confounded with the Dioscuri, Corybantes, Anasis, etc., just as the Kumara, whose reputed father is Brahma, or rather the flame of his wrath, which prompted him to perform the 9th or Kumara creation, resulting in Rudra or Nilalohita. Siva and the Kumaras were confounded with the Asuras, the Rudras, and the Pitris. for the simple reason that they are all one. An example, correlative forces and fires. There is no space to describe these fires and their real meaning here, though we may attempt to do so if the third and fourth volumes of this work are ever published. Meanwhile, a few more explanations may be added. The foregoing are all mysteries which must be left to personal intuition of the student for solution rather than described. If he would learn something of the secret of the fires, let him turn to certain works of the alchemist who very correctly connect fire with every element, as do the occultists. The reader must remember that the ancients considered religion and the natural sciences along with philosophy to be closely and inseparably linked together. Asclepius was the son of Apollo, the son of fire or life, at once Helios, Pythios, and the god of oracular wisdom. In exoteric religions, as much as in esoteric philosophy, the elements, especially fire, water, and air, are made the progenitors of our 5 physical senses, and hence are directly connected, in an occult way, with them. These physical senses pertain even to a lower creation than the one called in the Puranas Pratisarga, or secondary creation. Liquid fire proceeds from indiscrete fire, says an occult axiom. The circle is the thought, the diameter, or the line, is the word, and their union is life. In the Kabbalah, Bath Kol is the daughter of the divine voice, or primordial light, Shekinah. In the Puranas and Hindu exotericism, Vak, the voice, is the female logos of Brahma, a permutation of Aditi, primordial light. And if Bath Kol, in Jewish mysticism, is an articulate preternatural voice from heaven, revealing to the chosen people the sacred traditions and laws, it is only because Vak was called before Judaism the mother of the Vedas, who entered into the rishis and inspired them by her revelations. Just as Bath Kol is said to have inspired the prophets of Israel and the Jewish high priests. And both exist to this day in their respective sacred symbologies, because the ancients associated sound or speech with the ether of space, of which sound is the characteristic. Hence, fire, water, and air are the primordial cosmic trinity. I am thy thought, thy God, more ancient than the moist principle, the light that radiates within darkness, chaos, and the shining word of God, sound, is the son of the deity. Pymander 6. Footnote. The opponents of Hinduism may call the above pantheism, polytheism, or anything they please. If science is not entirely blinded by prejudice, it will see in this account a profound knowledge of natural science and physics, as well as of metaphysics and psychology. But to find this out, one has to study the personifications and then convert them into chemical atoms. It will then be found to satisfy both physical and even purely materialistic science, as well as those who see in evolution the work of the great unknown cause in its phenomenal and elusive aspects. Thus, we have to study well the primary creation before we can understand the secondary. The first race had 3 rudimentary elements in it, and no fire as yet, because with the ancients, the evolution of man and the growth and development of his spiritual and physical senses were subordinate to the evolution of the elements on the cosmic plane of this earth. All proceeds from Prabhavapavaya, the evolution of the creative and sentient principles in the gods, and even of the so-called creative deity himself. This is found in the names and appellations given to Vishnu in exoteric scriptures. As the proto-logos, the Orphic, he is called Parvaja, pre-genetic, and then The other names connect him in their descending order more and more with matter. The following order on parallel lines may be found in the evolution of the elements and the senses, or in cosmic terrestrial man, or spirit and mortal physical man. 1. Ether, hearing, sound. Air, touch, sound and touch. 3. Fire, or light, sight, sound, touch and color. 4. Water, taste, sound, touch, color and taste. Earth. 5. Earth, smell, sound, color, touch, taste, and smell. As seen, each element adds its own characteristics of its predecessor, as each rude race adds the characterizing sense of the preceding race. The same is true in the septenary creation of man, who evolves gradually in 7 stages, and on the same principles as will be shown further on. Thus, while gods or Dayan Kohans, devas, proceed from the first cause, which is not Parabrahm, for the latter is the all-cause, and cannot be referred to as the first cause, which first cause is called in the Brahmanical books Yagad Yoni, the womb of the world. Mankind emanates from these active agents in cosmos, but men, during the first and second races, were not physical beings, but merely rudiments of the future men. Bhutas, which proceeded from Bhutadi, origin, or the original place whence sprung the elements. Hence, they proceeded with all the rest from Prabhavapayaya, the place whence is the origination, and into which is the resolution of all things. For me, that is source, right? We talked about that. You came from source, you return to source. As explained by the commentator. Whence, also, are physical senses. Whence even the highest created deity itself in our philosophy, as one with the universe, whether we call him Brahma, Iswara, or Purusha, he is a manifested deity, hence created, or limited and conditioned. This is easily proven even from the esoteric teachings. After being called the incognizable eternal Brahma, neuter or abstract, the Pundarikaksha, supreme and imperishable glory, once that instead of Sadaika Rupa, changeless or immutable nature, he is addressed as Ikanaka Rupa, both single and manifold. He, the cause, becomes merged with his own effects, and his names, if placed in esoteric order, show the following descending scale. Mahapurusha, or Paramatman, Supreme Spirit. 2. Atman, or Puravaja, Protologos, the living spirit of nature. 3. Indriyatman, or Hirashikisha, spiritual or intellectual soul, one with the senses. 5. Bhutatman, the living or life soul. What happened to 4? 6. Kshetrajna, embodied soul or the universe of spirit and matter. 7. Brahantidar Shanata, false perception, material universe. The last name means something perceived or conceived of, owing to false and erroneous apprehension as a material form, but in fact only Maya, illusion, as all is in our physical universe. It is in strict analogy with its attributes in both the spiritual and material worlds that the evolution of the Dayan Kohanic essences takes place, the characteristics of the latter being reflected in their turn in man collectively, and in each of his principles, every one of which contains in itself, in the same progressive order, a portion of their various fires and elements. And that is going to bring us to the end of the creation of the first races. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I differ greatly from many of the things that Mrs. Blavatsky believed. I don't hold to most of the terrestrial control systems, of which Hinduism is a control system, just as much as Judaism is, just as much as Christianity is, just as much as the governments are. All of those are systems of control. We require systems of control. The ones that you ascribe to help to define who you become. I cannot hold to a religion that is in part wrong, right? It's why I fell away from Christianity, because of the Bible study, because it is so very contradictory within itself. Even within the same chapter in the same book, there are direct contradictions. To me, that makes it untenable. It is not something that is to be given authority. It can be a reference guide. There is good history contained in there. It can even be a moral reference guide. There are some good things in there on a moral level. But it should not be taken as infallible. It should not be taken as absolute truth, because it is verifiably untrue. The same is true for what we are seeing here. There are good things contained in this book, and then there are some things that just aren't. Now, I'm always willing to be corrected. I say that so many times because it is a truth. It is really something, right? The Bible study was me being corrected from what I thought into actuality. What we're doing here, it is me being corrected in some ways. I am seeing things that I am assimilating in the exact same way that I am getting rid of or rejecting the parts that don't work, the things that we know evidentially are not true. There are parts in here that are absolutely true, and hopefully I'm being careful but deliberate in separating the two. That is the point, right? To separate what is real from what is not quite true, which is a self-insertion or a belief that is not necessarily correct, or even simply not having enough information to go off of, as in the case of helium and hydrogen. Maintaining truth is important even in spiritual matters. I believe in God emphatically. I believe that we are here as created beings with purpose emphatically. I do not state that as fact. I state it as my speculation. I state it as my experience. I state it as something that I believe. You can believe it, but if you choose to believe it, test it first. Make sure that I am accurate. Make sure that I am consistent, at least within my own logical frameworks. Make sure that my references actually correlate with actual things that we can prove. Will we ever be able to prove all of it? No. But the parts that we can prove, we need to spend time to prove. We need to understand chemistry if we're going to talk about elements. We need to understand ionic bonds and the isotopes if we're going to talk about how creation happened. If we're going to talk about the Holy Spirit, then we need to understand the components of it, and that is the components of it. Every single atom in existence is the Holy Spirit. When it's in motion, that is the Logos. That is change happening. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said. As long as it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see discussed in the manner that we are doing here, drop it in the box down below. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. The bills don't pay themselves. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.